Welcome to Screen Crush, I'm Ryan Airy. Let's talk about the ending of episode 4 of Loki. So I'm going to talk about the Timekeepers reveal and the post-credits scene to answer what's going on and who's behind all this. It turns out that Loki actually called this in the first episode.
I know what this place is.
What is it?
It's an illusion.
The TVA, the Timekeepers, the Sacred Timeline, all of it was
Bunch of bullshit?
Now, we shouldn't have been too surprised. In the comic book What If, there's a run of stories about the Timekeepers manipulating variants from different realities to ensure their own survival. These variants all turn out to be Nexus beings, but I'm going to explain that later. In the Avengers West Coast comics, we learned the Timekeepers have also been using the villain Immortus for the same exact reason, to ensure their own existence. In the comics, the Timekeepers were created at the end of existence by the last surviving agent of the TVA. He creates them, then sends them back in time to the Big Bang so they can go on to create the TVA. This loop is the perfect metaphor for a needless bureaucracy that exists to make sure that it exists. We're seeing something similar in Loki. Maybe not the Big Bang and Space Lizard stuff, but the Timekeepers, Villain X, who is controlling the Timekeepers, is trying to maintain their own power. The entire series Loki is about free will versus determinism, as symbolized by the fascist structures of the TVA versus the free will and anarchy represented by the variant Lokis. The TVA are the ultimate fascist authority. They use propaganda tools like Miss Minutes.
Welcome to the Time Variance Authority. I'm Miss Minutes.
There is also creepy 1984-like posters all over their offices, and most importantly, they began their grip on power with a big lie. Fascist structures or even monarchies always begin with a big lie. Oh, the pharaohs park God. Kings are chosen by divine providence. Putin rides horses very well. Rawr, man. Villain X is able to maintain their power over the TVA by perpetuating their own big lie.
Stepping off your path created a Nexus event, which left unchecked could branch off into madness, leading to another multiversal war.
So, if the Timekeepers are a lie, let's assume everything is. There was no multiversal war, meaning there is no sacred timeline. There are probably just many different realities completely unaware of each other, constantly creating new branches like the World Tree Isigral. Maybe by pruning the branches off the timeline, the TVA are just making sure that their branch in reality never intersects with another timeline that's already out there and create like a wormhole or whatever. This also answers the number one question that you've asked me on Twitter. If there's one sacred timeline, then how could there be so many variants of Loki? How could Sylvie have grown up a girl if Loki was born a boy? Well, the answer is there was never a sacred timeline. The existence of variants proves what Mobius said.
Existence is chaos.
So if everything was a lie, this also means that there was no multiversal war. Or if there was, then maybe Villain X might have lost it. And now they're trying to make sure they won't lose the next multiversal war. But more than likely, the multiversal war is another lie the TVA uses to control their workers. Again, following the fascist playbook. Hitler burned down the Reichstag, blamed the communists, and seized power. Palpatine started the Clone Wars, blamed the Jedi, and seized power. Villain X made a cartoon about a war and used it to seize power. Dictators rise to power by creating an enemy within their own people, some group that they can label the other. In this case, the variants. Like when Hunter B-15 says,
I don't want anybody out there to forget what you are.
Oh, you only hope of capturing a murderer.
No, a cosmic mistake.
Actually, I want to amend what I said earlier. This timeline is sacred, but only for one person. It's sacred for Villain X, because this is the one timeline where they were able to seize power. Like all dictators, power is its own reward, and they have no greater mission. So, why so many realities? Especially realities with Lokis.
The TVA has pruned a lot of these guys, almost more than any other variant.
Because these variants, especially these Lokis, are the greatest threat to Villain X's grip on power. Alright, so who is Villain X? Well, let's look at this post-credit scene for clues. It turns out that Loki was not erased, he was transported to an alternate timeline. In our Easter egg video, I theorized that this timeline was one where Ultron won. He sent out a global shockwave that pressed all of the buildings against each other like we see in the trailer. But then I thought about it and I realized that if this were Earth post-Ultron, then these Lokis could have called Heimdall for help. So this means this is an alternate reality where Earth is destroyed and Heimdall is dead. Now maybe it's set after Ragnarok, or maybe in this reality, Loki won. He destroyed the Avengers, conquered Asgard, then decimated Midgard and the other 9 realms. This could just be a Loki triumphant timeline. Now this opens up our next question. Why are all of these Lokis here? These are Lokis from other realities. First off, there's classic Loki played by Richard E. Grant.
As I served you in the old wars, I serve you now.
This is the old school villain Loki from the comics, the guy who is responsible for the Avengers banding together. Now he's an outright villain, a guy who hates Thor and wants to rule Asgard. Then there's Alligator Loki? Monitor Lizard Loki? Look, my herpetologist friends, hit me up in the comments or on Twitter, let me know what this is. One of our followers suggested that this Loki turned himself into an alligator instead of a snake to scare Thor.
Time we were real children, he transformed himself into a snake, and he knows that I love snakes. So I went to pick up the snake to admire it, and he transformed back into himself, and he was like, yeah, it's me! And he stabbed me.
But there's also the mighty Throg. This is a frog version of Thor. Long story about how that happened. But maybe there's an alternate reality where the Asgardians are all animals, sort of like the dimension that Spider-Ham comes through.
I just washed my hands. That's why they're wet. No other reason.
This one is the biggest mystery. The credits list him as Boastful Loki, and notice that he has a hammer that could be an alternate version of Mjolnir. It could be that this version of Loki fashioned his own hammer to brag that he was stronger than Thor. And most importantly, we have Kid Loki. In the comics, Loki died in Ragnarok, but he made a bargain with Hela to keep his name out of the Book of Death, and instead, he was reborn as a child. Now this is fitting with his Norse mythology roots, where Asgard lives through a cycle of death and rebirth, but it also parallels the Loki that we know, who keeps dying a redeemed hero only to be reborn as a villain. Now in the comics, Kid Loki goes on to become a member of the Young Avengers. Now if you watch this channel a lot, then you already know that we've made a video about this, but so far, every new Marvel show has introduced at least one member of this team. We have Kid Loki, Wanda's twin sons, Elijah Bradley, Kate Bishop in the upcoming Hawkeye series, and we've already met Cassie Lang in the Ant-Man movies. So we have all these different Lokis, and it wouldn't make sense if they were variants off of one timeline because they're so radically different from the Loki that we know. So we can reason that they are Lokis from other realities who pissed off the TVA by threatening the power of Villain X. The TVA stepped in to reset them, or maybe tried to reset them. So here's my theory. Maybe all of the variants, all the people who cause these Nexus events, are actually Nexus beings. In the comics, there's a Nexus being in each reality. They're like the center of their reality, and the universe revolves around them. And not around you, Becky! So these Nexus beings are the constant. In the normal comics universe, the Scarlet Witch is the Nexus being. In that run of What If comics I talked about earlier, the Watcher assembles a team of these Nexus beings to protect the Timekeepers. So maybe in the MCU, a Nexus being is just the variant who stepped off the path and created a new reality. You know, like Loki. And the reason so many Lokis are Nexus beings is because they're always going against the plans of Villain X. Because, you know, Loki's gotta be Loki. Even in Norse mythology, Loki is always the chaotic element, who always leads the world to change. He cuts off Sif's hair, which leads to the creation of Mjolnir. In the comics in the MCU, his schemes created the Avengers. To quote Banner, Lokis are a
chemical mixture that makes chaos.
So they are the ultimate threat to anyone wishing to create ultimate order in the universe. So whoever Villain X is, they are the most afraid of Lokis because people in power are terrified of change. Okay, so back to why they're here. Assuming these variants are Nexus beings, then it could be impossible to erase them from existence. Instead, they're transported here, to a reality where Midgard and Asgard have been destroyed. At least, I'm hoping that's the case, because I don't want Mobius to be dead. I really want to see my boy ride a jet ski.
There was a beautiful union of form and function, which we call the jet ski, and a reasonable man cannot differ.
So there have been a lot of theories about who's behind the Timekeepers and the TVA. Kang is the most popular theory. We even ran a video about that. After all, Ravonna Renslayer is Kang's paramour in the comics. The snow globe on her shelf could be a clue that leads us to Kang's city of Chronopolis, the Time City in a Bubble, which was in the Quantum Realm in Ant-Man and the Wasp. We also theorized that it could be Immortus pulling the strings. In the comics, he's an older version of Kang who worked for the Timekeepers. So, Kang and Immortus are obvious choices. I even think the Loki showrunners trolled fans by making us think one of the Timekeepers kind of looked like Kang. So, I don't actually think it's Kang. Too obvious. So who do we know that could create such a huge, elaborate lie? History's greatest liar. Loki.
Surprise!
I think the actual villain of the show, Loki, is Loki. A different Loki from a different timeline. The reason the TVA prunes all of these other Lokis is because Mastermind Loki understands that they are clever enough to figure out his deception.
I mean, you really believe in all this stuff?
3 magic lizards
Timekeepers.
created the TVA.
So that post-apocalyptic New York, where I reasoned that Loki beat the Avengers and conquered Asgard, that's where Mastermind Loki is from. In fact, I have a theory about how he conquered this version of Midgard. We glimpsed at this reality in the Loki trailer, when Loki is wearing a Vote Loki badge from that comic series. In the background, you can see a video game called Polybius. This game is an urban myth about an arcade game created by the Pentagon that created psychoactive responses in everyone who played it. So maybe Mastermind Loki created that video game in this reality. Then, because he's all into mischiefs and games, he released it to the public and drove everyone insane. So what we see here is the result of that nuclear apocalypse. As for what's going to happen next, these Lokis will probably team up like they did in the comic Mighty Thor. It could even be that they've never found a way off the planet because they've never worked together before. And maybe this new Loki, our Loki, who's going through all this real growth and change, can help bring them together. But I'm hoping that Mobius is also here and he can help rally them and change their hearts, the way he changed our Loki. Though, to be honest, I really hope no one's behind this and the TVA is just a bureaucracy that exists for the sake of bureaucracy. It would be way cooler if we never found out where it came from, there was no way to stop it, and at the end, it just keeps going, like when the government locked away the Ark of the Covenant. But that's just my thoughts. Let me know yours down in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe. For Screen Crush, I'm Ryan.